In the last episode, we traced the full origin story of the Benin Empire, from Igodomigodo, the proto-state before monarchy existed, through the Ogiso kings, the arrival of Oranmiyan from Ife, the founding of the Oba dynasty under Ewuare I, and the slow consolidation of power across 3 centuries. We established what Benin was before it became an empire. Now we're going to the moment it became one. He came to power in 1440. He rebuilt a city. He reorganized an army. He restructured the gods. And when he was done, nothing in West Africa looked the same. In 1440, a man named Ewuare took the throne of a kingdom that had existed for centuries. What he did next wasn't incremental. It was a complete reconstruction of military power, political structure, urban design, and the theology of kingship itself. His name doesn't appear in most Western history books, but in West Africa, in the oral tradition of the Edo people, he is called Ewuare the Great. And the word great is not flattery. It is a precise description of what the evidence shows. By 1440, the Benin Kingdom had already been running for roughly 3 centuries under the Oba dynasty, the line that began with Ewuare I after the end of the Ogiso period. It was a developed polity, a capital city, a court, a guild system for craftsmen, trade connections stretching to the coast and inland. But it was a regional kingdom, not yet an empire. Its territory was defined. Its institutions were functional, but not dominant. It had not yet become the force that Portuguese explorers would find 45 years later, and describe in letters home as formidable and organized beyond what they expected. That gap between the kingdom of 1430 and the empire the Portuguese encountered in 1485 is essentially the length of Ewuare's reign. He is the bridge. Every scholar who works on this period dates his reign to approximately 1440 to 1473. Portuguese first contact came in 1485 under his son Ozolua. The transformation that happened between those 2 dates is what the oral histories attribute entirely to one man. Ewuare was, first, a conqueror. The oral histories describe campaigns in every direction: west toward the Akiti kingdoms, east toward Igbo territory, south toward the Niger Delta, north along the forest margins. The canonical count is over 200 conquered towns and villages. Do not take that number literally. Take it as a unit of meaning. This is what a tradition says when it wants to communicate that a man fought everywhere and almost always won. What we can say with confidence: Benin's territory expanded dramatically during this period. Archaeological evidence of the earthwork system's expansion is consistent with the oral tradition's description of a kingdom actively incorporating new territory. Neighboring polities that were independent before Ewuare's reign were paying tribute to Benin by the time his son Ozolua was dealing with the Portuguese. And here is the distinction that matters. Ewuare didn't just raid. Raiding gets you cattle and prisoners. What Ewuare was building was territorial empire. Conquest, followed by administration, followed by tribute extraction, followed by the incorporation of new populations into the Benin political system. That is a completely different operation. That requires a completely different kind of military machine. He built one, defined ranks, a command structure, the capacity to coordinate multiple simultaneous campaigns across different terrain in different directions. This is not a militia. This is a professional military apparatus, organized and maintained by the state. But military power alone doesn't maintain an empire. what Ewuare understood, and what makes him a genuinely sophisticated political actor, is that you also need institutional architecture. He created what scholars call the palace chief system, a tier of titled officials who owed their position directly to the Oba, counterbalancing the older town chiefs who represented hereditary lineage-based authority. This was deliberate political engineering. No single power block could now become strong enough to threaten the monarchy. The palace chiefs needed the Oba to exist. The town chiefs were balanced against them. The Oba sat at the apex of a system designed so that every powerful faction depended on him for legitimacy. He also formalized primogeniture, first son inheritance, as the rule of succession. Before Ewuare, succession in Benin could be contested, as it was in most pre-modern states. Formalized primogeniture didn't eliminate succession conflicts. Benin's history has several, but it created a default expectation. It reduced ambiguity. It gave the state a mechanism for continuity that didn't depend on the dying king's ability to name a successor at exactly the right moment. This is documented. The palace chief and town chief division is a confirmed feature of Benin's court structure. The primogeniture norm is attributed to Ewuare in the oral tradition and reflected in everything that follows in Benin's political history. This is not speculation. This is the institutional record of a man who knew exactly what he was building. And then there is the part that often gets missed entirely in discussions of African political history: the theology. People hear sacred kingship and they think ritual, ceremony, tradition, something pre-political, pre-rational, something that happens alongside the real business of governance. That is exactly backwards. Under Ewuare, the Oba's sacred status was elaborated and formalized in ways that had direct, immediate, practical political consequences. The Oba could not eat in public, could not be seen sleeping, could not let his feet touch bare ground. His daily life was surrounded by restrictions. The Edo word is Iwu, that set him apart from ordinary human existence in every observable way. These were not arbitrary customs. They were a political system. An Oba who was sacred, whose body was understood as literally connected to the health and continuity of the kingdom, could not be challenged without challenging the cosmic order itself. You weren't just deposing a king. You were destabilizing the universe. That is an enormously powerful protection. Because force is expensive. You have to maintain an army. You have to pay soldiers. You have to win every battle. But divinity is self-maintaining. It runs on belief. And belief, once embedded in ritual and reinforced by ceremony across generations, is extraordinarily durable. The Igue Festival, the annual ceremony in which the Oba renews his spiritual power, dates from Ewuare's period. It is still performed today by Oba Ewuare II, 580 years after the first Ewuare established it. Think about that. An institution that has survived conquest, colonialism, exile, and the deliberate dismantling of everything around it. Still standing, still performed. That is what it looks like when you build something correctly. Ewuare also rebuilt Benin City itself. Wide, planned avenues, the palace complex at the center, guild quarters in designated areas of the city, and, most visibly, the expansion of the earthwork wall and moat system surrounding the capital and its network of subordinate settlements. The walls of Benin were not built all at once. They were expanded over centuries, and Ewuare's reign represents a significant phase of that expansion. Archaeologist Patrick Darling's definitive survey of the Benin earthworks published in 1984 after years of fieldwork in the Nigerian rainforest, documented a total wall and moat network exceeding 16,000 kilometers. His estimate of the total Earth moved, approximately 100 times the material in the Great Pyramid of Giza. The 1974 Guinness Book of Records listed the Benin earthworks as the largest earthworks carried out prior to the mechanical era, anywhere in the world. Under Ewuare, a city became a capital became the center of an empire. In 1485, Portuguese explorers under João Afonso de Aveiro reached Benin. The Oba they met was Ozolua, Ewuare's son. What they found was not a kingdom still developing, still emerging, still figuring itself out. They found a fully formed empire, an Oba with sophisticated diplomatic protocols, a city that operated on a planned grid, a military with real territorial reach, a court system with defined hierarchy, an economy exporting pepper, ivory, and cloth at scale. A Portuguese visitor writing home around 1505 described Benin City as a great city comparable in scale to Lisbon. Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, the most advanced maritime nation in Europe at the time. They found the output of Ewuare's 40 years of work. They arrived after the transformation, not during it. Which is why you have to understand Ewuare to understand anything about Benin's relationship with Europe. The man who built what the Portuguese found never met a European. He built it for his own people, on his own terms, in the middle of the 15th century. Everything Europe would later call formidable, magnificent, and, ultimately, worth destroying, was built by a man who died before any European set eyes on it. That is the genius of Ewuare the Great. Not that he impressed visitors. He wasn't building for visitors. He was building for history. And he built something that lasted. Next episode, we go inside the empire at its height. Not the founding, not the fall, the peak, the palace, the court, the economy, the ritual life that held everything together. What did it actually feel like to be inside the most powerful kingdom in West Africa? That is next. Every episode in this series is linked in the description and pinned in the comments. The full story in order, from the very beginning of the Benin Empire to the fight happening right now to bring the bronzes home. If you are just finding this channel, start at episode 1. If you have been here from the start, episode 4 is next. Don't miss it.